Okay, well, hello everybody. Can you hear me, Patricia? Are we good?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Hello everybody. Susan Gillis and Patricia Fiorillo here, of Boca Raton Historical Society. Let me mute my phone. There we go. Welcome to our virtual lecture series, Caring for Your Family Collections. This is part 2, and we're going to be talking about caring for your family papers and scrapbooks. And the sweet little picture on the right is students at Calusa Elementary back in 1991, and they're writing a giant letter of condolence to Dr. Seuss's family after he passed away. Isn't that sweet? I think it's really lovely. Well, let's talk about paper. Paper's been made of many materials over time. You all have heard of papyrus and probably have heard of parchment and vellum. Those are actually leathers. And you may remember diplomas used to be called sheepskin. And that's because, guess what? That's what they were made of. My grandmother's diploma is parchment. It's not really what we call paper. But we're going to talk today about paper based on cellulosic fibers, that is plant material. And the paper making process at its basic is very simple. You make a slurry, a slimy mess out of broken down rags or wood pulp or whatever it is. You put it in this frame with a screen on it, let it dry, and voila, you have paper. And so that's been around for a very, very long time indeed. Now, up until the mid-19th century, paper was made out of cotton and linen rags. And it's known as rag paper. And you may be familiar with that. Today, you can buy a stationery bond or rag paper. It costs quite a bit more than regular paper. But at the stationery store, art supply store, or even the office supply store. But up until the Civil War era, newspapers, for instance, were made on rag paper. Wood pulp paper is a wonderful process. It meant you could make paper out of wood, trees, which were very easy to get a hold of, a lot less expensive. So wood pulp paper really revolutionized the world in the sense that it became newspapers and books became much, much less expensive. And ordinary people could now afford to read the paper, to have the paper, or buy little books and so on. The problem is that wood pulp paper is by nature much more acidic because of the process used to make it. So ironically, newspapers from here's one from 1770, here's one from 1867, are going to survive a lot longer than the paper you collected that of the Twin Towers coming down or the snow day in 1977, because they're on wood pulp paper. I used to work at the Fort Lauderdale Historical Society. We had a collection of newspapers from 1840 or so. The reason being is they contained dispatches from Fort Lauderdale. And yes, it was a fort during the Second Seminole War. And they looked like they'd just been printed. They were unbelievably good shape. I was just amazed. Here we have an example, the Cat Courier. Now that's a little newspaper from Boca High. You know, they're the Bobcats. And you can see it's obviously on a higher quality paper. And it hasn't turned yellow or brown with acidification. Here's sort of a worst case scenario. So you may have heard of dime novels. You know that line in The Music Man, there's a dime novel hidden in the corn crib. This is an example of pulp fiction. So pulp fiction means it's fiction made out of wood pulp paper and therefore very inexpensive. Dime novels are what we would call graphic novels. They just didn't call them that. And they were extremely popular, especially with young people. And this one's really, really cool. It's from 1915, and it's unbelievably fragile. When you touch it, little pieces of paper just sort of fly off, and that's because it's so darn acidic. And eventually, it's just going to completely deteriorate into little pieces of nothing. Wood pulp paper. Now, in museums, we talk about the aging of artifacts, just like we age. And there's three basic types: mechanical, biochemical or microbiological, and natural. And it's the job of the curator to mitigate or slow down the aging process of all of our collections items as much as possible. Can we completely stop it? Not usually, but we slow it down so those items will be preserved and around for future generations. So let's examine the different types of aging. Mechanical aging includes things like folding, tape, staples and paper clips, and dust. Now, you notice this yourself. If you have a piece of paper or even a costume, like an old quilt, that's folded, where is it going to break? Where is it going to deteriorate first? Along that fold. Look at that poor old map at the upper right. It has been through heck. It's been folded, has water damage, it has a lot of tape damage. Curators hate tape because when you pull it up, it takes pieces of the paper with it. There are archival tapes you can buy to mend papers, but you should be very sparing with them. You should practice and make sure it is an archival sort of mending tape. Use that very sparingly. But other kind of tapes, stay away from them. We don't like them. We also don't like staples and paper clips or metal paper clips because they're metal. And guess what? They rust, particularly in our climate. And they leave holes in things. And if you have poor quality paper with paper clips on it, say from 50 years even ago, the paper clip is now much stronger than the paper it's holding together. And when you try to remove the clip, you'll get whole chunks of paper off, and that's sort of not the idea. Dust itself is abrasive. So keeping your items clean and dust-free is real important. Now here's my favorite, biomechanical and microbiological aging. So this includes insect damage, mildew and mold, foxing, water damage, and acid transfer. Now the picture at center shows you the back of a mat of a photograph, and you can see it has water damage and mildew. We're all familiar with that. Foxing is those little orange spots. You see it right, those little orangey brown spots, and it's called foxing because it's fox colored. And we often call those climate stains. But it really, we believe it's attributable to the action of mold or mildews. It's a chemical reaction in the paper. And that's an iron oxide, like a rust stain. Very, very common, something we see a lot, not only in papers, but in antique clothing and things like that. Okay, and that's a result of high humidity and high heat. Water damage and acid transfer. Let's take a look at a couple more slides. Here's some old mats from a framed object, and this is a good example of acid transfer. So more acidic objects can transfer their acidity to less acidic objects. In this case, we have acid transfer from old tape. There's no tape left on there. That's just the stain. And something else has stained the piece at the bottom there. Oh, here's one of my favorite examples. So this is a scrapbook someone put together, and they cut out articles. These are from the 60s, so they're not real old. And taped them with old-fashioned Scotch tape to the paper. And you can see the acid stain created by that newspaper clipping on the notebook paper, which is much less acidic, believe it or not, from being closed up together all those years. And the other stains are from the adhesive from the Scotch tape. And look how brown they are. So that's very acidic as well. Here's a couple of old-fashioned manila folders that we all have with acid stains. They probably had a cardboard mounted photograph or something like that contained within them. So the manila folder is acidic, but whatever was in it was even more acidic and has turned it this brown color. Silverfish, oh my God. We'll talk more about this in our next lecture series. Talk about damage. At the upper picture, you can see the little jaw marks of those little silverfishies. Kind of creepy, huh? Silverfish like the sizing in paper and certain adhesives. And you can see the example at the bottom. That's the edge of the inside of an old-fashioned notebook, you know, not a vinyl one, but the old-fashioned cloth cover. And man, they really enjoyed themselves there. Natural aging. The worst threat to all of your collections and yourself in terms of aging, ultraviolet light, Mr. Sun, okay? And it can exacerbate acidification and any other condition. Light in general is also an enemy to your collections. Temperature and humidity, and of course we have high temperature and humidity, which can promote mold growth. But more important, it's the fluctuation of temperature and humidity, which you have even in a given day, that's a threat to the collections because it makes things expand and contract, particularly things like paper, but all organic items are expanding and contracting, and every time they do, they're aging. You can see a photograph there at left. Clearly there was a little mat on the photo. The part of the photo that was protected by the mat is its original color, but very faded. To your right, we have both acid burn from a cardboard that was behind the picture, as well as fading. Here's one of my favorite examples. I have a box we call Naughty Conservation Examples. So here's one of them. So back in '89, I took a trip and I forgot to tell the newspaper to hold the paper. And so they ended up outside when I got home. And you probably have this experience. You can easily tell which one has been outside the longest because it's the most brown, the most yellow, because you have not only a very acidic paper newsprint, but with the action of the sun to exacerbate it. So you've got 3 days outside, 2 days outside, 1 day outside. Now let's talk about the physical preservation of archives, and then I'm going to turn it over to Patricia, and she's going to talk about digitization. First of all, this is the ideal lighting condition for your papers and scrapbooks and so on. That is no light at all. Environment. Air conditioning is very important. Don't store your collection in the garage or the utility room or the attic or an unair-conditioned storage place, okay? Ideal conditions are, and this is very harsh, 70 degrees Fahrenheit, which to me is freezing, and 50% relative humidity. That's the ideal. It's really hard to maintain in our climate. More important than that, and I was told this by professional conservators, is that you retain a stable temperature and relative humidity. Again, I talked about the fluctuation with the change of RH and temp. And you can monitor your relative humidity. You can purchase a device that is a hygrometer pretty easily online, maybe even in an art supply store, so you can take a look at the relative humidity. There are also devices that continuously monitor relative humidity and temperature that are compatible with your computer. These are more expensive, but nonetheless, you might be interested in that. Good circulation is also important. Now, it is possible to store papers and things like that in an unair-conditioned environment. However, it requires that you have good circulation, windows open, and so on. And unfortunately, this is real impractical because for security reasons, not only for the, you don't want the two-legged variety of intruder climbing into your collections or your whatever area it is, but also the 4- and 6-legged variety that may just walk right in when you keep a nice open window. So it's not practical. You're going to have to go with air conditioning. Now, there's all kinds of archival quality boxes out there, and this is what we recommend for storage of papers and so on. Every size you can imagine, to everything from baseball card size to newspapers and larger. They even make sexy looking black ones if you want to, and red and all different colors as well that are acid-free archival quality. Get online and just do some exploring. The more quantity, the greater the quantity of the item you purchase, the less expensive it is. So you want to shop around. A lot of times you aren't going to want but 1 or 2 large boxes. So you're going to have to shop around and see what the best deal is. Light Impressions, University Products, Hollinger, Metal Edge. I think that's part of Hollinger these days. And there are other companies that sell these products. You can sometimes buy these in art supply stores too, you know, if you just need one or two. Here are our go-to containers. In a museum setting, you like to standardize. You don't want to have too many diverse sizes. It makes it hard to store things. So our go-to is this banker's box. That's what you call that size. But this is, in fact, a Hollinger acid-free box. Hollinger sort of invented archival storage. Mr. Hollinger worked for the GSA, for the government, storing records. And one day, I guess the light bulb went on and said, boy, you know, it would be better if these boxes were acid-free. But anyway, that company is still in business. To your right is an acid-free folder. We use thousands of them. Now, there are also archival quality plastics that you might want to use, and sometimes that's appropriate for your papers and so on. The ones on the left are what I call top loaders. They go in a notebook, and you see right on the cover it says archival, safe, and acid-free. These can be easily had at office supply places, or certainly online, depends on how much you need. But there are all sorts of specialty pages. Now, the ones on the right, I like very much. The top loaders are sealed on 3 sides, but they do make archival like Mylar sleeves that are more like little books. And the reason that's better is because you do less damage when you put a fragile piece of paper in there. There's less handling. Whereas if you have to shove that piece of paper into, you know, one opening, it can really damage the paper, which is not the object at all. Here's a couple of more examples. See, the one on the left is like a book. So I prefer those. They cost more, actually, ironically. There's a wide range of costs. There's also different mill of the Mylar, the polyester film. Some is thinner, some is heavier. It depends on what you're storing in there. And obviously, the higher the mill, the more it costs. And you have some little old-fashioned books contain, and they're very acidic, just like that old dime novel. So they need an acid-free environment as well. Now, caution, not all plastics are archival. Here's my little collection of non-archival plastic. Now, it's not so easy to get anymore, but a couple of decades ago, we had a lot of vinyl, PVC sleeves, just like notebooks are made of vinyl. Okay, polyvinyl chloride sleeves to hold your negatives, your slides, and also top loaders. And the problem that PVC is not acid-free. In fact, the picture on the left is an absolutely amazing example of PVC that is totally breaking down, and it sort of scrunched itself. The chemical bonds are disappearing, and you can see these actual brown spots in what started off as a perfectly colorless piece of plastic. Unbelievable. And can you see how yellow these pieces of plastic are? On the right, I just saved it because it was interesting. The plastic on the right is an old-fashioned, just a real cheap plastic drop cloth, like you might get at the Home Depot or something, okay? And it's so old that the plastic has turned into little tiny pieces. So every time you open it, it flakes all over my house, so I may have to throw that away. So even plastics break down. Thank God for our environment. But even plastics break down. So you want to be cautious that whatever you use states specifically that it's acid-free or archival quality. Lamination versus encapsulation. Lamination is a heat process, okay? A lot of us are familiar with lamination. We do not recommend that for archival materials. It's not reversible. And the heat can damage, and the laminate can damage the item in it. What we recommend is called encapsulation, which is basically sandwiching your archive between 2 pieces of Mylar or polyester film, and then you seal around the edges. And it makes handling of original materials much easier. Now, here's a caution about that. The problem is that these plastic sleeves and the polyester film in particular has an electrostatic charge. And so if the document has friable material, for example, that dime novel, it's very friable, charcoal, pastels, colored pencil, graphite, even some paints, even some inks, that plastic charge can lift that right off the paper, which is, again, not what your goal is here. So you need to be very cautious about what you encapsulate. Sometimes it's just better to use an acid-free folder. Not only do they come in folder size, filing cabinet folder size, but all sorts of paper envelopes. Again, some of them are cut properly, so it's easy to insert your fragile object or object that you want to preserve. Don't ever use encapsulation for photographs. If you want to hang that diploma on the wall, make sure you have archival framing or museum mounting. If you go to Michael's or wherever to have something professionally framed, you tell them I want it archival framed or acid-free framed. They're going to know exactly what you're talking about. But you can, in those stores, often purchase acid-free framing kits. So you want to look for that, archival or acid-free framing. They probably have a UV protective glass or acrylic in there, an acid-free mat, and an acid-free backing. And so that's what you want for your original materials. Now, curators have a love-hate relationship with scrapbooks. So I have a couple of stories there, okay? For instance, in our collection in Boca Raton, we have one of the most wonderful things we have in the collection are a couple of scrapbooks. They're huge. They're like full-size, old-fashioned newspaper page scrapbooks that contain all sorts of clippings and newspaper photographs relevant to the Meisner Development Corporation's Boca Raton project. What a treasure. We have scrapbooks. We have about 15 scrapbooks that have every article that appeared in the local papers about Boca Raton government. It's an incredible time capsule of the government goings on in the 1960s. So these are great treasures. Now, you may be thinking, Sue, can't I reconstitute that type of scrapbook using newspapers.com or other digital archives? So I want to share a little story about that first. No is the answer. I am personally working, I live in Oakland Park, and I am on my own time working on researching for a book on the history of Oakland Park. So I spend a lot of time in our city's clerk's office where they have these wonderful, great big old-fashioned scrapbooks with clippings from the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, all on Oakland Park. And I took a lot of notes, and so I came home and I said, okay, great, now I can pull up the Sun Sentinel on newspapers.com and download these as digital files, so I'll have them. Well, guess what? A lot of the articles I found in those scrapbooks were not in newspapers.com, even though they were from the Sun Sentinel, because apparently a lot of the articles were from the old community news sections that the Sun Sentinel, well, still does. City Plus, Northeast, there would be it looked like a magazine. It comes with your papers, and it would all be stuff on Oakland Park and Wilton Manors, or Pompano, or Hollywood. And that's where all the really goody articles about my community were. And same thing with Boca. All the things focused on your community. So for some reason, they may not have been saved because every part of the county had its own section. Anyway, they have not been digitized, even though I know the name of the paper and the date and the page, and you can look for it by date, can't find them. What that means is those scrapbooks contain the only known copies of those articles, are known to me, possibly on the planet. And therefore, the original scrapbooks are still very important. Not to mention, to track down all those articles, even digitally, is a very, very laborious project. So that's why the scrapbooks and their contents are not really replaceable. Okay. Now, here's why we hate them. I think these pictures speak for themselves. I showed you the picture on the left, and some wonderful lady clipped all these clippings. Again, this is about 1960 Oakland Park. And she would nicely clip out the article, and then she would clip out the masthead, that's the title of the paper and the date and everything, and tape them all with old-fashioned Scotch tape to these notebook pages. And a lot of time there would be, they're little articles, so there'd be 3 or 4 on a page. And the problem is that Scotch tape has failed. So every time you open the page, the article goes over on the left and the masthead goes on the right. And if you have 4 articles, some of them go this way and some of them go that way. Oh my God. We had a heck of a time reuniting article with date and paper. Very bad, not cool. On the right, we have an example of my most hated magnetic albums, evil magnetic albums. You can see the glue lines, that's the adhesive, and the plastic over it. And sure enough, that adhesive has failed. Sometimes it won't let go. Sometimes it does the opposite. But in this case, it has failed, and the articles, as soon as you open the little plastic, they want to just fall out. And once again, someone has lovingly cut out these little sections of paper. Do they go together? I'm not sure anymore. Here's a really good, bad example of that, where you can see not only are the pages falling out, this is the music guild, but look at how yellow the plastic has gone. That's acidic burn, that's acidic plastic. Look how brown the glue is, that's acidic, that's acidity. Now I want to talk briefly about deacidification. There's this stuff called deacidification spray, which you can buy in art supply stores and so on and online, but it's not a perfect solution. It has a buffering agent to neutralize acids, okay? Sounds like a real good solution. But the problem is that the sprays can cause inks and non-color fast papers to run or smear. They can discolor color fast items. You should never use it on photographs. And more importantly, it's not practical. You might spray, number one, it's expensive. Number two, you might spray 1 or 2 pieces of paper. Are you going to do thousands of pieces of paper that way? That's just not a real practical solution. And also, apparently, the deacidification the effect may be temporary. So we're going to turn to an alternative that we are blessed in the 21st century to have, which is digitization. But I want to mention this, something else you can do to your scrapbooks to retain their longevity is interleaf the pages, or maybe you have a little booklet, like a promotional booklet. And interleafing paper is just acid-free paper, rag bond. And you can buy a fancy type of paper from one of those online catalogs I mentioned. But you can also use high quality paper just from the office supply store. That's actually what we do. And interleaf. And what this does is this acts as a buffer between one acidic page and the next acidic page, kind of slow down that aging process. Now, scrapbooks these days, if those of you who like to scrapbook know that there's easy access to all kinds of very attractive archival supplies to make your scrapbook with. Archival quality notebooks, paper, and it's ironic that old-fashioned photo tabs, like were on Great Grandma Me's photo album, little black corners, they're available in Mylar, which is a archival quality plastic. They're in vogue again because what you aren't damaging your image or your piece of paper by putting them in the mount. You can easily take them out. But my other suggestion is, it's so easy to make reproductions of these things right at your house, with your printer. And you can print a copy of an old article or a photograph or what have you, and it looks just like the original. Use those copies to make a scrapbook. Put as much glitter in the scrapbook as you want. Use whatever kind of messy but pretty paper you want to use. And keep those originals safe in that dark environment in those acid-free containers so they're available for the next generation. So and that way you can enjoy the album and the contents without worrying about the future of the items within it. They're just reproductions. And now I'm going to turn it over to Patricia. All right, let me stop my screen sharing. Okay. All right, Patricia.
Okay, give me a second.
Ooh. And we don't need Susie.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm just going to go over a quick reminder from last week. Remember that there are 2 standard guidelines that we recommend: Federal Agencies Digitization Guidelines Initiative, or FAGI, or you can use Florida Statewide Digital Initiatives. Just remember that these are guidelines, that they're not rules. They can be confusing and way too in-depth for maybe what you're trying to do. Come on. There we go. Okay. So again, high resolution versus low resolution. Since we're working with text documents that have text on them this week, I recommend that you always scan them high resolution, even if you're just scanning for access. The reason for this is because if you scan a document with text on it at a lower resolution, you're not going to be able to make out the writing or the words on the document. You can see right here on the left side of your screen is a document. You can very clearly see the writing even at the bottom, Miami Beach Temporary Office. That's because it's scanned high resolution, unlike the photo on your right, where you can't make out the writing at all, and you certainly can't make out this much smaller writing, and that's scanned lower resolution. So just remember that when you're working with text, always go for the higher resolution. And just a reminder, high resolution is anything over 300 DPI, dots per inch. We recommend that you scan at 600 DPI and you save it as a TIFF and not a JPEG. So other factors that I didn't talk about this last week that you should keep in mind is whether or not you want to scan in black and white or in color. I recommend that you always scan in color. It's much easier to turn a document into a black and white document than it is to do the opposite, turn a black and white document into a color document. Especially if you're working with scrapbooks, you'll have mixed medium where you have something that you can easily scan in black and white, but you'll also have maybe pictures that you would want to scan in full color. Also, another factor that you want to consider is where you're cutting off, where you're scanning the document. Do you want to have a border? Does the writing go all the way to the edge? If so, then you're going to want to have at least an inch less of a border around the document so you can clearly make out the text that's at the edge of the document. You can see I scanned all the way to the edge here at the bottom of this scrapbook, and you wouldn't be able to make out this last line right here. And scrapbooks, again, just love them so much. People tend to overlap, so you'll have to scan something several times to get the whole document. So just keep in mind the information that's on the document and make sure that you're collecting all of that information when you're digitizing, and make sure it's all readable. This is just another example of scrapbooks. Sue cataloged all of our Meisner scrapbooks, and she went ahead, not just cataloged the entire page, not cataloged, scanned the entire, not just scanned the entire page, but she also went in and scanned individual documents into high resolution so they would be even more accessible. Now that's extremely time consuming. It might be not something you're looking into, but if you have a scrapbook with smaller documents in there that you think you're going to want to access easily, then I would suggest scanning individual newspapers. You know, optical character recognition, or OCR, sounds like something out of an eye doctor's office, but really it's just a way to make your computer recognize text within an image. Now, whether you're scanning TIFF, JPEG, or PDF, the computer is going to recognize that document as an image and not a text document. So what OCR does is it goes in, it scans your document, the image, it recognizes the text and converts it into a text document so it's searchable. You're going to want something searchable if you want to quickly look up a word within a document. For example, okay, I wanted to look up softball, and it's right here in the document. You can look up Scouts, and it's easily found within the document. I can find 12 incidents where there's the word scout, and it'll highlight it for me. Just as a caveat, though, that this is a very time-consuming process. Not only do you have to find a software that will OCR something for you, you also have to, once it's OCR, once the document is scanned, you have to go through and proofread it, making sure it's catching the words it's supposed to be catching and not just making up words. Now I'm just going to go quickly over the equipment you're going to need to scan. Now, as always, I recommend you have an external device that you save your images, documents, what have you on. We use a portable hard drive, but you also can use a USB or thumb drive. I recommend portable hard drives. We use portable hard drives because you can store more on them, up to 1 terabyte, which is a huge amount of storage space. But that might not be what you need. Also, scanners, you can use a regular scanner, but just know that if you're scanning scrapbooks, then you're going to need to scan in sections like I did with the first example. If you have access to, or you want to buy a flatbed, large format flatbed scanner, then I recommend you make that investment. Otherwise, if you're just scanning like one scrapbook, you're not going to need it. I would suggest just scanning in sections. Now, keep in mind that not only are you going to need the physical equipment, you're also going to need the software to support this equipment. You're going to need Adobe Photoshop or some form of image editing software, and this is Microsoft image editing, and it's free if you have a Microsoft computer, but it's not as comprehensive as Photoshop, which is a little more pricey. Now, if you want to OCR something, you're going to need Adobe PDF or Adobe Reader, but there's also free Adobe free OCR softwares out there. Remember to always install your Epson, your scanning software into your computer. Now, I just want to take a minute to remind you, always have an unaltered copy, an unaltered original, and just make copies from that original and alter those copies. Do not alter the original document. Always have a backup for anything you scan. Always have duplicates. You never know, something might happen to one USB drive, one portable hard drive, but you'll always have that second one if you need it. And that's it. So you want to close this out here?
Hey, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. You want to share your screen again there, Patricia?
Oh, sure.
Can you do that and I can talk? the last slide. Yeah. I just wanted to mention, uh, this sweet little picture is from our Boca News collection, and it's all the local high school newspaper editors from 1987. I thought that was sweet. Just think how long ago that was. So thank you all for joining us. And next week is our third part of our Caring for Collections. And I'm going to do one of my favorite talks, which is getting the bugs out about pest control and your family collections. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.